This image was captured in Yosemite National Park in California, which was Ansel Adams' old stomping ground. And what I'm pre-visualizing here is a very dramatic black and white image, which is not being rendered at all accurately with this rather insipid color image that we're looking at now. So let's start this black and white conversion. Okay, what we have here is we have a little targeted adjustment tool, and we can come down to the grayscale mix, or alternatively we can come over to the HSL grayscale tab and click on the convert to grayscale. Now sometimes what happens when you click on this convert to grayscale, you'll notice the workflow options will change to one of the dot gain for black and white conversions, which is usually suitable for industry printing of these black and white images in newspapers or magazines, but not if we're printing to inkjet printers. I'd prefer to leave the space in a typical sort of Adobe RGB or sRGB color space. The inkjet printers are sort of expecting RGB images to come and don't really understand the grayscale images that we might convert them to. Okay, so with that out of the way, we'll select OK, leaving it in an RGB space. We can now mix the colors to get the best black and white conversion. If you're not at all familiar with what the colors used to be, for instance, we can actually use that targeted adjustment tool to just come in to the image and click and drag down to render a tone darker. Now you can see it's focusing on the blues on the panel on the right hand side. I'm going to stop at around about -50, otherwise these snow-capped mountains here are also going to become too dark. I could also come down to the foreground information, and this is quite a yellowy orange, and as we push that down you can see the orange is climbing and we're getting a little bit more brightness into that foreground. It's actually very difficult to create a dramatic black and white images with these tools alone. Okay, so I'm going to show you probably some of the most important tools for creating dramatic black and white images. And we're going to come into the first of these, which are the graduated filters. You can press G on the keyboard to access this. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the minus exposure value, and I'm going to come down to -1.5 stops. And we're going to make this sky a lot more dramatic just by clicking just above these clouds in the center of the image and dragging down to where I suspect the horizon line would be. Just hold down the shift key as you drag that to constrain it to a perfect vertical graduated filter. Okay, if we wanted to create some more drama in the clouds here as well, we could also add clarity into that mix. And I'm going to wind in maybe 50 or 60 clarity just to give myself a little bit more definition in those clouds. We can continue this process by adding more than one graduated filter in the sky. I'm going to start a little bit higher now, halfway between the top of this one and the top of the image, and then drag down just to the top of those mountains now, again holding down the shift key to constrain that to a perfect vertical. Okay, now I'm going to add a third one. We can click on the new item or just click away from the first one, but I'm clicking the new because I'm going to modify that by just backing off to around about -1 stop. I'm going to take out the clarity this time just by double clicking on that clarity slider to 0 it, and I'm going to add a third graduated filter. Ansel Adams did really like his dark, dramatic skies, and so that's really what I'm creating here. And I find it more effective to create this gradual transition with more than one gradient rather than trying to do it all in one shot. Okay, we're going to add another gradient from the ground going up, so hitting on the base of the image and then dragging up perhaps halfway up to where those huts are in the central portion of this image. I could probably go a little bit darker, so I'm going to click on that exposure slider and bring it down perhaps to a -1.5 stops. Okay, now you can see that we're getting a much more effective black and white conversion. Okay, effectively what we're doing is we're darkening various aspects of the image to direct the viewer's attention towards this central portion of the image. Okay, if I click on and off the preview here, you can see a before and after. We're really drawing people into the center of the image where I believe the focal point of the image should be. Okay, now we're going to do some more localized adjustments. This time I'm going to come over to the adjustment brush tool. Okay, we're actually drawn to the light, okay, and also areas of sharp focus in this image. So I'm going to make these huts a much more of a key element. I'm also not happy that some of these mountains in the background are going a little bit dark there. So I'm going to click on the plus exposure value, maybe half a stop brighter. We'll see that we're working with the auto mask switched off. I prefer to work quickly with the auto mask off. It actually can cause edge artifacts if we're unlucky, and so I always like to start with this feature switched off and then use it if I have to in order to control where I'm actually painting. Okay, so we've got the feather, flow and density all set to 100 here, and now with that half stop adjustment I'm just going to paint over and into those mountains here and over onto the huts. Okay, and we're getting quite a lot of more light filling that area. If I want a little bit more contrast into those areas, I can add either contrast or clarity, or maybe a little bit of both. Here the clarity is working quite nicely, just to give a little bit more definition in there. If you notice some of the adjustment is spilling into the sky, we can actually remove that by subtracting some of this adjustment. If I hover my mouse cursor over there, you'll see the adjustment has indeed moved over into that sky area. This is possibly where I would now come in and select that auto mask, coming into the sky and holding down the option key. I'm just going to increase the size of the brush. I'm using the square bracket keys next to the letter P in order to increase the size of the brush, and then I'm just going to click and drag to remove that adjustment from the top of those mountains there. Now if I keep my crosshair behind the edge of the mountains there, that will make sure that the adjustment stays on the mountains but is removed from the sky. And again, if I put my mouse cursor over that pin, you'll see that that's done very effectively indeed. Okay, it's always worth often zooming in to actual pixels or 100%, just as a guarantee that we've not created any edge artifacts in that area. Okay. If at any time you want to see the mask overlay without putting your mouse cursor over the pin, you can always just select the option here, Show Mask. Okay, I'm actually going to zoom in to 100%. I'm going to use the keyboard shortcut on a Mac that's Command Option 0 to zoom in to 100%, and then I'll use the space bar just to move over to the edge of those mountains, just to make sure that edge is clean. And yes, we've got a nice clean edge there, so that's been really a quite effective adjustment we've done there. I'll just fit in screen now by using the keyboard shortcut Command 0 or Control 0 on a PC to fit on screen. Now another area that I'm not quite happy with at the moment is these distant mountains are getting fairly low in contrast and also clarity, and that's because of the excessive UV light in the atmosphere here. So I'm going to add a new adjustment brush. I'm going to click on the new radio button. That will deactivate the current setting. Okay, and now we're going to go in with a negative exposure, maybe half a stop down, and I'm going to increase the clarity up to around about 50 here. And then I'll just reduce the size of that brush slightly and then paint over. Now again, it's probably important to remove the auto mask. Again, we could create edge artifacts in these areas if we're unlucky, so always best to start the painting job with that auto mask off. Okay, now I'm moving into the clouds as well because I want some more definition there, and I'm also interested in getting these mountains nice and dark. If we got too much excessive adjustment in these areas, again I'll just hold down the option key, reduce the size of the brush that I'm working with, and then remove those adjustments from that area. That's probably a little bit severe. I'll just Command Z to undo that last change, and what I'll do is I'll lower the density as I pull that out, or alternatively you can lower the flow. Here I'll lower it to 50% and just pull out some of that adjustment into that area there. Okay, now we've made a couple of good local adjustments, both to the mountains and the central focal point of this image. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add a third adjustment brush, again coming down with a minus half a stop adjustment. Again, I'll make sure the auto mask is switched off. I'll put that flow back up to 100%, and I'll increase the brush and then just darken down some of the highlights in this foreground area. I'm not going to darken them all down. I want to leave a small pool of light just in front of the hut, and that will draw the viewer's attention into that area of the image, like so. Okay, now we've got those local adjustments in place. I'm going to go back to the basic panel. Okay, I'll just click on the zoom or hand tool to come out of those tools and come back to the basic panel. If we were looking to add some global contrast now, we can actually just now add plus 30 or 40 or 50, however much contrast that you'd prefer to see inside of this image. As you can see, this is the only adjustment that we have running through the basic panel. That's probably just a little bit too much for me, so I'll probably back off to 40. A lot of these adjustments are very subjective, and the actual order that we're working with is also not that critical. We're working very much in a non-linear editing space where we can just tackle the areas as we see fit in no particular order. Okay, I'm just going to make another couple of adjustments before I finish this project off. There's a small, slightly annoying cloud in the central portion of that image, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over to that spot removal area here. Now if you're having trouble seeing that cloud, we can always use the visualize spots option here, and quite quickly now we can see that area that was troubling me. We can also probably see a dust spot, a sensor spot, which we can also move. If your view isn't quite like this, remember we can move that slider to show or reveal more in those areas. Here we're seeing some of the light hazy cloud running through there. I'm just going to pull that down so I can just see the worst of the problems that I'd like to remove. And I'm just going to increase the size of the brush just slightly larger than the area I'm about to heal. Okay, and that's made a nice job there. And then reducing the size of the brush, just click on that dust spot there in that corner there. And now we can click off the visualize spots and come back out of this tool. Okay, and so we're going to get a nice clean effective sky going there. Okay, and what I'd also like to do now is just to add a small amount of sharpening to this image. We're going to go into the detail tab. We should really be at 100% for this, so I'm just going to use the keyboard shortcut Command Option 0. I'm just going to come to perhaps the hero element of the image, this hut here, and we're going to raise this sharpening. Here I'm going to raise it so we get a lot more crisp detail, maybe to 60 or 70 on that slider there. Now we'll find that some of the smoother areas are going to become a little bit noisy with those adjustments, so I'm just going to bring in the masking slider to clean up the areas of smooth continuous tone and just have the edges sharpened. So I'm going to hold down the Option key on a Mac or the Alt key on a PC and drag that slider just so we can get rid of some of those areas of smoother tone. Here we're going to have to drag it a little bit higher than is normal with a lot of images. Here I'm pulling it to 75 in order to clean up those smoother areas there and just leave the sharpening where I want it most. Okay, now I'm going to Command 0 to fit on screen, or Control 0 on a PC, and we're going to come up to our final adjustments now. We're going to come over to the FX panel. Okay, and I'm going to add a small amount of grey, and I'm trying to emulate a traditional black and white image which would have been captured on film, and so we'd have a small amount of grain present in those images. So it's probably a good idea again to zoom back into actual pixels and look at an area of tone that is representative of the image. And I'm going to drag the grain slider up to around about 20-25. Now Ansel would be using large format film, so I don't want the grain to be too significant here, and so we're probably going to keep the size no higher than 25 as well. Okay, and I'll zoom back out Command or Control 0 to fit on screen again, and then we're going to add a vignette. My preferred style for vignettes are color priority rather than highlight priority. These are less likely to clip the luminance values in the corners with this style, and I'm going to drag that down to perhaps minus 30 or so to give myself a nice darkening in the corners of this image for quite a dramatic scene that we've got going now. I'm going to come over to the back to the basic panel now, and now's a good time to set both a white and a black point for this image. Okay, I'm going to hold down the Option key and click on the black slider, and that's the Alt key on a PC, and just make sure we don't actually have too much clipping. Got a little bit of clipping on that dark brush there. I could either back off the vignette, or alternatively I can just wind back wind forward on this black sliders just to remove any evidence of that clipping in those deepest dark shadows there. And similarly with the white slider, again holding down the Alt or Option key, I'm going to assign a white point. Okay, I'm going to have to drag this quite a long way to the right this time before I find any clipping, and just a small amount appearing in the center of the image, so I'll back off so that we have now a full dynamic range. Again, we might take this opportunity just to make some minor adjustments to the exposure, depending on whether we want a slightly brighter image or a more dramatic dark image there. Now, when we're working with these black and white images and they are going off to print, it's also a good idea just to monitor our darkest details here by using color samples. We can actually find out the values of some of these to see whether your printer would have issues with these. I'm placing my cursor over one of the darkest portions of the image. If we've actually forgotten where the darkest portions of the image are, we could just again invoke some clipping. Just remembering we're on +8 here, and I'm just going to invoke some clipping. The darkest portions of those images are right down here inside this image, so I'll just drop a color sampler on there and then push that back up to a +8 value. And then we can use the RGB readout values to see whether this would pose a problem for our printer. Okay, we've got 555 there on the RGB values, and if that's probably just a little bit dark, we could back up either on one of the graduated filters, the vignette, or we could raise the black slider a little bit further in order to get those values a little bit higher, so they'll print a little bit more easily on our inkjet printer. And likewise with the we can drop another sampler into some of the brightest areas, maybe these white clouds here, and we've got values here 241, 241, 241, and that is a highlight that's very easy for my inkjet printer to print with full detail there. I'll just clear those color samplers now, and the image is ready to go to print.